real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. All right, we're back again. Nathan Romas with you. And today we have Calvin Chrustie with us. And a little bio on Calvin. He was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police from 1985 to 2017, during which he completed a tour with the United Nations in former Yugoslavia. And that was in 93 to 94. He was doing work with prisoners of war and body and kidnap negotiations. He was also awarded in 2016 by the Chiefs of Police the International Policeman of the Year. He's completed a number of degrees and educational achievements here. He's been a Master's of Law in Dispute Resolution and Negotiations, and further programs he's completed in cybersecurity at Harvard University and some stuff on crisis management. Calvin is currently a senior partner with the Critical Risk Team. This group manages situations involving kidnap for ransom incidents, cyber response, transnational organized crime threats, asymmetrical and hybrid threats, and security and advisory services. He's also got a number of volunteer credits to his name. So busy guy. Welcome, Calvin.
Thank you very much. And honored, and particularly honored to participate in a podcast affiliated with the municipal department, as my family heritage comes from the municipal policing lines.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into it. You got a very interesting career. I was reading a bunch of the stuff on your background and trying to pick out like, hey, what are we going to mention even in the bio? But I was like, well, I'm going to go through it real short and then we're going to let you do all the talking. So yeah, we appreciate having you here today. And we'll start at the beginning. And can you kind of tell us how you got into policing and spent so much time with the Mounties?
Well, I guess I'll probably start from, grew up in Winnipeg and grew up in a neighborhood that unfortunately some of my, childhood friends went down one path, and I probably got more polarized to go down a different path as a result of that. I'm still friends with some of those people. So I saw kind of some of the social harm type of activities that affected other people's lives. And I was talking to my wife the other day, and I said, reflecting on it after recently watching The French Connection with Gene Hackman recently, I reflected seeing that as a childhood movie back in the early 70s. And I think it probably had a lot bigger effect on me in terms of my interest in terms of policing and what I had a passion in policing for. And so I, as you alluded to, started, left high school, went into university, tried the summer student program for 2 or 3 years, and spent my summers in the RCMP in a summer student program in a couple of small towns in Manitoba, then up to northern Manitoba and some indigenous communities. And from there, I decided to kind of pursue a path in the RCMP.
Okay. What did you apply to any other services, or was it you're specifically geared toward the Mounties?
I actually applied for CSIS at the same time in a parallel approach. And coincidentally, almost the same day in the same week, was offered employment with both entities. And I chose the RCMP, a policing career, because I thought it probably provided a broader context of opportunities, coupled with a little more actions and activities. And I wasn't sure if I was prepared to sit at a desk and read reports and write reports. So I thought I'm probably more an action-oriented guy at this point, and I could pivot later on if I decided to do that.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, CSIS, I guess, would be considered our spy agency, if we call it that.
Yes, or security and intelligence agency on on collecting intelligence on national security threats, counterterrorism, foreign influence, espionage, etc. within Canada.
Okay. And not James Bond work, though.
I would say it would be kind of James Bond-like type of work in terms of perhaps not as sensationalized as that, but really involved in a very more covert type presence in terms of collecting intelligence, just disrupting, foreign threats to Canadian citizens and Canadian organizations, but much more discreet and covert. So it would be the possible parallel to 007, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you got into the Mounties in 1985. I went through in 2011. So I wonder, is your experience at Depot much different than mine? Can you kind of talk about training and what it was like back in those days?
Well, I sense from the political climate, at least today, I can't speak at the tenor that you went through, but I would say we were probably at the tail end. The charter had just come into effect, roughly several years before that. And I would say it was probably more old school paramilitary style of training, which, to be quite honest, thoroughly enjoyed. And everybody I know that went through it thoroughly enjoyed it. And possibly, contrary to current pop culture, I saw a lot of benefits to it in terms of character building, resilience, et cetera, probably maybe some downsides to it as well that I may not have awareness about. But it was basically break you down, build you up type mentality, and the boundaries in terms of political correctness and the sensitivity probably were probably not congruent with today's world, but nevertheless still enjoyed it and thought it was beneficial.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the topics I wanted to get to was kind of, you got in right around that time that the charter is starting to come in. And like any kind of legislation, it comes into effect, but to get it actually put into practice and everybody understands how this new thing is going to work and be interpreted, you're kind of right around that critical juncture at that time.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, policing was very, very different. And, compared to what it is today, I think I probably, witnessed some of the, greatest transitions, evolution in terms of challenges in policing. And, I recognized probably when I exited policing that what made me effective in the 80s and 90s probably wasn't something that that same skill set, mindset, character wasn't always conducive to contemporary context. And one can say better or worse or whatever, but without any judgmental analysis put on it. It's kind of like looking at leaders and people like Winston Churchill, great in wartime situation, but then he, had challenges as a leader because of his character post-wartime when there was peace there. And I think many of the people that were doing policing, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and even in the 90s, developed a certain style and, some characters and personalities were more effective back then than they would be probably in the modern contemporary times with different, professional boundaries and constraints to them.
Yeah, and I think a good point that you speak to there was in that paramilitary experience, the kind of the fortitude that you build being there, and when you're broken down and then you have to work really as a team and know your strengths, your weaknesses, and it's meant to have a lot of self-reflection, and some of that doesn't exist in the way it used to now, and you see a lot more people, not going to call people soft, that's not what we're saying, but it's, I think a lot of people just lack some of that resiliency, because some of the issues we deal with now are like, even within my career, 10, 11 year career, I never even saw that at the beginning of it. And people were able to kind of push through some things they're not able to deal with now. And maybe we'll even get into it more when you're talking about your current position with the critical risk team. Like, you got to go and talk to people with from different countries that actually, for the most part, outside of North America or the westernized culture, they're going to operate on a lot more of those old school mentalities, a lot more kind of hardened in their views and their beliefs. So I think people don't realize that could be missing here. And then now you got to go out in the real world and deal with people from everywhere. It can be quite eye-opening.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I still think there's probably functions within current policing professional roles, where some of, for lack of a better term, that wartime leadership personality characteristics are still required and supported and facilitated by the organization. And then there's I think it's kind of evolving that there's more and more in terms of other skill sets and personality qualities that are required. And I found, just coincidentally, and I'm kind of although there's no video to this, kind of giggling a bit. I found, as we may talk about here down the road, is that I was probably more effective, and as you alluded to in my introduction, the Canadian Chiefs of Police awarded me in 2016 Policeman of the Year internationally, and I think that's probably kind of speaks to the point that you're making. Is I don't think I would have won Canadian Policeman of the Year nationally, but I think I obviously was successful internationally because of the different environments and contexts. And I think, just my skill set, my training, my experience, and my personality was probably more inept to, perhaps more dynamic, higher risk taking, less boundaries, so to speak, in terms of policy, protocol, etc. And working abroad, I found myself feeling much more comfortable working with international partners than in the current context within Canada often.
Yeah. Well, and so around that time when you're kind of first starting out, was the charter, like, were you reading people their 10A, 10B, their charter rights, advising them of their, they don't have to talk to police and so on and so forth? Was that already kind of hard and fast? Was that a rule, or is this still kind of developing? And what did policing look like around then on your day to day?
Well, I was working in northern BC in a small logging community and several Indigenous communities. And to be quite honest, I mean, the charter came out, and this is going back to 86 when I started policing in those communities. And at 6 months service, not even 6 months, I think it was 4 months service, they, hey, Kelvin, there's the plane, jump on the plane. You're going to be flown into that Indigenous community, and we'll pick you up somewhere between 7 days and 10 days. And that's a 4 month service, right? So my training's finished. And I go into the community, and to be quite honest, it was pure common sense, survival, a lot of fear-based decisions in terms of, a 23-year-old guy coming out of the city, going into a community like that by yourself. And it's 11 o'clock at night, and there is no radio, there is no street lights, there are no cars, and you're having to kind of adapt, with a focus on survival and safety. The charter wasn't playing at the forethought in terms of operational consideration. It was very much more pragmatic in a lot of those communities, I think. And yes, did we charter people and do all that stuff? Yeah, I mean, it was fairly well instilled within policing, almost instantaneously, I would presume. But I would say that it hadn't evolved in terms of case law with all the specific nuances on it. So, like, I even look at back in the early 90s on disclosure, the evolution of the disclosure laws back in the early 90s. Like, people just didn't know what to disclose, what not to disclose. Everything was up in the air. So there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of, here's the strategic principles of the charter, and how does that cascade down into the operational and tactical, decision making and application within policing at the tactical and operational level.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine being back then, and well, I guess disclosure is a whole nother thing that we could get into, but it's you think of now, we can put in hundreds, if not thousands, of pages, whether it's reports, evidence, expert reports. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into it, and I couldn't imagine, 30 something years ago, you're looking and it's like, I wouldn't have any of that. So it'd be a whole different world, different kind of court process for all of it, but very interesting. So where did your career kind of take you?
So I went up north for the first couple of years, and I was very passionate, as I alluded to, in terms of my exposure to the movie French Connection, and my upbringing in terms of a hood in Winnipeg, where some of my friends had gone off to a different direction, including jail. And so I was very passionate in terms of drug enforcement. I started that up north, and was asked to come down to the lower mainland area here in the Vancouver area to get more involved with the opportunities here in drug enforcement. So I came down here, I got involved in a plainclothes section, a burglary section, learned kind of the basic street skills in terms of surveillance and other investigative aspects. But I had done that obviously up north, which is a lot more conducive in a small town policing environment, doing search warrants and handling sources in a small town versus being on patrol where you're going from call to call. But I got down here, and within about 9 months, I got asked to go to a plainclothes section. Did that for a year and a half, then went to a drug section for a couple of years in one of the municipalities in the Greater Vancouver area. And then I went to Vancouver Drugs, a federal unit, and worked on a marine importation, which was basically, I think, my first day of work. The operation, they were running a UC, and it was like for a ton of hash, which was a pretty big deal back then. So that was super interesting. Mm-hmm. And then, as you mentioned, I did a couple tours overseas to the former Yugoslavia, which was a complete eye-opener in terms of how the world works. Sometimes in other places, in probably the majority of places, except for nice places like Canada. And then I came back, went into national security, looking at counterterrorism stuff, particularly on the left-wing aspect of things. And moved into homicide to the first, I think, created anti-corruption unit within policing in Canada. And that was targeting essentially corrupt police officers, dirty cops working with organized crime for the most part. Did that for 3 years, and then ran a large detective unit down here with about 55, 60 detectives at Burnaby Detachment here. And then got seconded to the federal government and dealt with a lot of the disputes and negotiations with Indigenous groups out here, but also across the country. And I did that for just over 3 years. And then I got to where I think we're going to be having some conversations about, I was on my way actually to Israel for a year stint, and one of my former bosses caught me in the hallway, and I was going to leave in a couple of weeks, and said, "Hey, listen, would you come over to the intelligence program and run the intelligence program as the ops officer for it?" So I thought, well, he kind of talked me into it, arm twisted me. I'm not sure if it was the best decision, but I did it. And I ended up doing that for 3 years. And then in about 2010, I moved out to the money laundering anti-proceeds of crime unit, which I was very apprehensive going into because I couldn't balance my own checkbook. So I didn't know how I was going to conduct an investigation into that. And then I got very involved at that point in 2010, running international operations with the DEA, Homeland Security, FBI, and other international agencies. And basically, that was the beginning of kind of living in a suitcase and running operations, on the different 4 continents. And at the same time, I was running a parallel thing off my desk where I was running the national terrorist negotiation team, where we were doing all the negotiations for Canadians that were kidnapped abroad. And I had been doing that since like the early 2000s. And then at that point in 2010, I was the team leader doing it for Canada. So I was spending most of my time on a plane in a suitcase or in a hotel room somewhere until I retired in 2017.
Oh, I never would have thought. So when somebody gets taken as a hostage in another country, that falls into the RCMP's kind of their, I don't say jurisdiction, but
yeah,
into their mandate. I always thought that'd be like a military thing.
No, so they, well, it's the government of Canada. The lead agency was Global Affairs, our external, our foreign affairs branch of the federal government. And then within it, they had the military was part of those responses, our special forces. CSIS was part of the response, and the RCMP was part of the response. And under the criminal code for extraterritorial investigations, if there's terrorist involvement on it, and without getting into the complexity of the legal requirements to trigger an extraterritorial investigation, but terrorism is one of them, then the RCMP has mandate to investigate that. So our 2 roles essentially in it was one to conduct a parallel criminal investigation while there was a response from the Canadian to try to resolve and repatriate or to gain the release of the person. So I was involved in the negotiations with the terrorist groups, with a group of individuals that we would be deployed in most cases abroad to assist and support foreign affairs and work with our other federal partners on it, including the military and the intelligence component to it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, it makes sense. Combined forces type operation. That's, I think a lot of people don't realize just how many jobs exist within the RCMP and the opportunity to not only move across Canada, but they've got places worldwide. And that's actually a pretty big draw. I'm surprised. I don't think I really see that get pushed in a lot of their recruiting. They might talk about like you get to move, but boy, those are some interesting positions. Like that's a lot of stuff that I always thought, police did, but you don't hear about it. And I imagine you could be there for 20 years and not even see half the job postings for a lot of the jobs that they have there, a lot of the specific assignments you could do. So that's pretty interesting. One thing I maybe this will kind of lead us into our discussion of what you do today, but you were saying you were working on the national security, and it kind of was toward the left wing groups.
Yes.
You're probably the first person I've ever talked to that's ever mentioned that. Everybody nowadays, and most of the political narrative is always everything's right wing and everybody's some sort of Nazi. But what are the left wing groups, or like what groups did you deal with back in the day?
Well, one group, and it's subject of disclosure in court, so it's open for public discussion. One group was it was called MDATF, and you're going to ask me to remember what that stood for. I can't remember.
People could Google it.
Yeah, but essentially it was a group of individuals that were affiliated with organizations like ELF, the Animal Liberation Front, and environmental groups. And these folks were particularly focused at anything relative to animal testing or anybody doing anything with animals or the environment, and they would target them. And the targeting included bombing. I think they actually did a bombing in a lab in Alberta, if I remember correctly. And so they were fairly very willing to use violence to accomplish their political objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And there was they were kind of the extreme element within that left-wing movement, but there was always that left-wing movement where you had the law-abiding, for the most part, Greenpeace and others at one end of the spectrum in terms of the left-wing movement. And then at the far end of the spectrum, you'd have MDATF and others that were affiliated with them.
So when it comes to national security, do they... can you kind of explain how they might classify groups? Is it by ideology? Is it by, left versus right, red versus blue type? Or is it just you kind of look at their structures and characteristics and then you say, okay, they're whatever they might be?
Well, I don't consider myself, when it comes down to the bureaucratic classification and Canadian government classification of groups in that. I don't profess to be a current contemporary expert in it, because it's been a bit since I've been involved in how all that gets processed organizationally wise. But at that time, I think it was just like on a case by case basis. What was are the people committing, significant criminal acts, i.e., if you're blocking a road for an hour in a protest, wasn't a big interest to the national security folks.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're spiking trees with spikes with the intent of having a logger put his chainsaw into it and have it kick back, and injure himself by cutting his arm off, or the chainsaw flipping up in his face, and you're doing those type of activities where your intent is to grievous bodily harm, or in these bombing cases, then for the purpose of just understanding them, back in the day when I remember doing it, like in the 90s, we had right wing, we had left wing. I just coincidentally was on the left wing. I mean, I had since that time worked right wing targets,
Mm-hmm.
but it was in a homicide thing where we had neo-Nazis that were responsible for killing, racial killings, and that out here in Vancouver. So we have both out here historically.
Yeah. I and I mean, the definitions seem to constantly change. The goalposts never stay in the same place. I would say all I hear now in at least today's media is about right wing, and then if you're considered, you're shutting down pipelines and other things, you're a protester. But I guess it's definitions, and people can change those. So interesting. But so you were working in the national security, and it sounds like you had quite the, the scope of different places that you went to. What's kind of the most memorable spot for you, and did anything kind of lead you into what you do today, or maybe have more of an impact on what you do today?
I'm just processing that for a second. Well, there's probably a number of factors. Probably the first factor was my exposure working. I probably spent four years working abroad, or 5 years working abroad in difficult context. Whether they be war zones, post-conflict zones, or high risk areas.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I think my exposure, working with the Canadian military as peacemaker back in the former Yugoslavia, I really got a better appreciation in terms of probably the cost and price people paid for democracy and freedoms, and the sacrifices that, say, for example, our military and others that participate in those operations paid, both historically and in terms of contemporary environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I saw was policing over the last decade that I was involved. I was seeing more threats that were becoming a national security threat, a threat to our democracy and freedom from foreign entities operating in Canada and transnational organized crime groups. And I think my historic kind of experience working in these other countries
mm-hmm.
made me probably more highly motivated to work in the space that I'm currently working in, as with the critical risk team, where we're working with clients in the private sector, corporations, law firms, NGOs, and others, with the interest of trying to protect them currently from these same threats I was seeing when I was in the RCMP and in policing, and where I saw, to be quite frank, that the system itself, the judicial system, ranging from police leaders, prosecutors, judges, politicians, and everything, appeared to be, in my assessment, fairly ineffective at mitigating those threats to Canada. So I, left the RCMP. I was actually not interested in getting into this work because I had done so much of it, and working around the world and traveling and dealing with stressful situations. But when I retired, my phone started ringing, from former colleagues from the military side and other side, going, "Hey, will you be able to help this person? Will you be able to help?" And it really wasn't what I was interested in doing. But I just found that there wasn't anybody really doing that much of it in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what kind of motivated me doing it. And when I look at it now, currently, I'm probably doing very much the same thing in many ways that I was doing in policing, where we're doing like intelligence operations, investigations, risk mitigation, trying to help, families, businesses, law firms, trying to solve their problems where they're under some form of threat. And the difference really is, at the end of the day, I just don't have the bureaucracy,
Yeah.
and I don't have the politics. And I find, that the way that the judicial system has evolved, one, but also I think as the culture of our country has evolved, and they say, bad times create strong people,
Mm-hmm.
good times create weak people. I think, since the 60s and 70s, we've created a lot of weak people, and we don't have a lot of strong people. And I think the combination of all these factors and globalization and the polarization of the world has given this enhanced need on the private sector. I think there's this void: who's taking care of the corporations, who's taking care of these NGOs, who's doing all this stuff, and really, my experience is the police do not have the capacity to do it anymore. They may be able to go to the B&E, they may be able to go to the domestic dispute and do some of the fundamentals of policing. But I would suggest the evolution of the judicial system and the charter and everything else. I think it's very difficult to be effective at protecting Canadians at that, with these high level international threats posed to Canadians. And that's kind of how, what's kind of motivated me to stay in this area. And to be quite frank, I feel more fulfilled on the outside than I probably did in the inside, because I was always hitting the glass ceiling, with my head within the organization. And on the outside, I'm finding I'm dealing with probably just as interesting threats, whether they be from the triads or being from a foreign government or from a spy agency or from, transnational organized crime groups. I'm feeling that, just as fulfilled on the outside without the bureaucracy of the inside and the politics. So, and that's kind of that journey that I've taken, and, that's where I'm at right now.
So can you kind of break it down for anyone who would be listening? What exactly does the critical risk team do? And can you kind of flesh out, like, maybe even if you have an example of how a business might approach you, what type of problem they come to you with, and then how you in turn kind of work on that?
Well, okay, I will. First of all, I'll just say what structure is. The structure is like a diverse group of professionals that has worked, in risk, security, intelligence, and crisis situations. So we have former special forces, former intelligence, former police. We're very, very closely affiliated with law firms in terms of the work that we do. Because usually they're the ones where everybody goes when they have a really significant problem. They go talk to their lawyer first, and the lawyer goes, okay, what are our options? Mm-hmm. Do we contact the police? Are they going to be able to do something? Which I get the sense more and more they're thinking that the police won't be able to help them with some of these complex problems. So they quite often reach out to entities like ourselves. And basically, I use the term, but I'll explain the term, asymmetrical problem solvers. We solve people's security, risk, intelligence, and crisis problems that they're ill prepared for and they didn't expect to encounter. So one may be somebody, a business leader involved in a business dispute, and all of a sudden getting, life threats to himself from a foreign entity, and the police. We may look at, hey, let's go to the police. Let's have a conversation with the police about it. We find the police don't have the intelligence capabilities and or the resources to, or because of the policy implications and structures, they can't find out who's making the phone calls and who's making the threats. Thus, they can't mitigate the threat. Thus, they can't protect the Canadian citizen. So we come in and through our intelligence capabilities, we'll reach out to our international partners and figure out who the person is making the threats, and attempt to mitigate it and assess it. And we try often to work with police, intelligence, military, and other entities, and we try to facilitate that sometimes where we see that as being the preferred option. But that's one case. Another case, somebody, investors investing in a new business, and somebody rips them off, $50 million or $100 million, and they may come to us and say, "Hey, can you help track down where this person is, where the money went?" And we'll look at tracing assets. Another one is looking at foreign interference, where corporations are seeing protesters protesting against some type of development, whether it be oil or mining or something else, and they'll go, where are these protesters getting their money, and how do we mitigate this? Particularly if it's a foreign entity that's supporting the protesters.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll look at, hey, okay, first we'll figure out where the money's coming from and how do we mitigate it? Do we do it legally? Do we do it through countering the information? These are the kind of the current context in terms of the foreign threats. And lastly, the last example, media will sometimes come to us, with journalists becoming more and more under threat in Canada
Mm-hmm.
due to their coverage of foreign threats operating in Canada, whether it be China, Russia, Iran. And if they're trying to do news stories on it, they may come to us and ask us for assistance and support in terms of security and risk mitigation. So those are just kind of a couple of the type of situations that we kind of currently engage in.
Well, that's you guys sound busy then, because I imagine there's no end to that work. And it makes me think of something where some of the guys that we deal with in the organized crime aspect, they even say that there's people that have direct influence on the day-to-day activities here in Edmonton. And this would be true for places like Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, any of the big cities, and then it goes out from there. But there are people from all the way in India, the Philippines, Dubai. We have guys over in Europe that have direct influence, are calling shots here all the way through multiple channels down into Edmonton. People wouldn't have a clue that exists. And then a lot of the guys even tell us, like, nowadays with the way the system is set up for the judicial system and the police, and how we can kind of respond, but we're limited within the charter and case law and common law and all these other things. And not saying that we're not effective and that we don't have our time and purpose and our place to handle these things, but there are things that are beyond police capabilities. And they know that. And some of these organizations are extremely well funded. Sometimes I refer to them as like small governments, with the amount of money and people and resources that they have. And they can reach out and touch people wherever they need to. They can move assets around. They build, when we put on the news, we found a container on the coast with drugs in it, or we caught someone at the border bringing a truck over. Like, that's all built into their budget. And they know that. We get told that all the time. You guys, we send 10 trucks through. We know you're going to catch one of them, but you're so busy with, you have to take all the photos, you got a fingerprint, you got to do 100 pages of paperwork with that one truck you got. That's going to take you a month to process. How many have driven through? And it's like, well, you're not wrong. So what do we or people do about those things when it starts getting even greater in scope? So it sounds like that's kind of your niche, right? Where you kind of come in.
Yeah, and we cover a certain area of that, but we could probably have a whole podcast conversation just about the transnational organized crime activities, threats, and the gaps and the challenges and that. But, long and short is, after spending 10 years specifically just in that field, and, listening to leadership, listening to both in policing, out of policing, in the judicial system, in the political system, I have yet heard anybody, other than a few friends and associates, over a beer or a coffee, talk honestly about how ill-equipped ill prepared and potentially ineffective we are in terms of the whole judicial system, including, police, prosecutors, and judges. And, when I reviewed like parts of the recent money laundering inquiry out here in BC, and they virtually dismiss, issues relative to the challenges with disclosure law. I don't think many of these people, they just haven't been at the table on these operations working around the world to understand, number one, how Canadians and their justice system is perceived, and probably equally how incongruent it is to effectively work with international partners and agencies. I'm just going to move because I have a train below me here somewhere, so I apologize for that. But I don't think there's like really frank, honest conversations about it.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody seems to try to avoid having these very serious discussions, and they look at coming up with a whole bunch of other excuses for what's happening in society in terms of the proliferation of organized crime, the threats, the fentanyls, the money laundering, and all that. They keep looking at everything but perhaps legal reform, including, I would say, the leadership of police.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're doing anybody any great favors by not having a public dialogue about it and examining it. And when I looked at, we tried to do that in the Cullen Commission, it was a whole bunch of lawyers and some judges, but they're not at the table when we're running operations and we're sitting, in a boardroom in Miami with a bunch of Colombian and Mexican police going, how are we going to deal this? And then we go, oh, hey, there's a thing called stench comb.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? We describe it to them, and they essentially, politely walk out of the room. They can't do that. They can't work that. That means dead people in their country
mm-hmm.
if we abide by that law. And it's not that we're trying to be maverick, rogue, or go around the charter, but it's just incongruent. The charter and the Canadian legal system was designed for policing in a fishbowl, I always say, i.e. Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're policing in all these issues, even including in Edmonton, have these international tentacles and influences, you can't stop and mitigate those threats, using approaches that work in the fishbowl, because Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, it doesn't matter which city across Canada, we see foreign operatives touching on each and every city. And when we looked at the score sheets of Chapo Guzman's son years ago, I mean, he had all the score sheets where they were dropping off coke in Vancouver, in Edmonton, in Calgary, in Regina, in Winnipeg, in Toronto. All those cities are touched by the cartel.
Mm-hmm.
And the legal system really doesn't do anything, to assist and support that. So I think that's a big challenge, but that's probably a whole nother conversation we could have.
Yeah, well, and based on the conversations we have with people who are in these worlds, you're 100% right. And I think a lot of it doesn't help with just fanning the flames and the narratives out there. As soon as you say, well, we can't really operate within these rules the way we need to, instantly it becomes, oh, you're just trying to hurt people. You're trying to be dirty cops. We don't do ourselves a lot of favors in that we don't stick up for ourselves in a lot of ways. That's part of why we have this podcast, is because it's to have conversations with people and get some depth to, the discussions that should be had out there. And we're not so worried about just being PC all the time. And I think that's a lot of that's kind of, like you were saying, it ends up with dead people. Certainly a lot of the conversations being had are very narrow-minded and not really seeing the bigger picture other than what's 2 feet in front of you. So And I get there's also a political aspect to a lot of what's said and done out there. But are we really trying to save people here? Because if we are, we need some harder conversations. So what does your job kind of entail? Like, what's your day to day? What does it look like? Are you still living out of a suitcase, and are you all over the world?
Well, I try not to. I've been fortunate with COVID. It's kind of restricted travel, so I've been able to stay home, which I enjoy in that. However, I just came back from Latvia, right on the border of Russia, to deal with clients over there. And, next week I'm off to Winnipeg to meet with a number of law firms to discuss some of the assistance and support we can provide them and their clients. And then the week after, I'm going to Chicago to speak on a international panel to Fortune 500 companies on international kidnappings. And I know they're always, the topic is specifically looking at kidnap for ransom, but really we're looking at, or what I would like to introduce in the topic, without letting the cat out of the bag here, is really looking at state-facilitated kidnapping, where we saw the two Michaels in China kidnapped, where we see a basketball player in Russia, where states are now using this, almost facilitating a kidnapping themselves, i.e. An illegal detention. And I see this being, a growing concern. So we're looking at doing that because some of our clients, because of their travels to businesses or their associates of businesses, puts them into some countries at risk as the world's getting more polarized. So I still travel a bit, but hopefully not as much, because I do enjoy being at home now.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it there. I think it's a good place to end. We have a lot of other things we could talk about. Just in your last speech here, your last bit, I was like, wow, there's about 10 things I could ask you.
Yeah.
But I do have to go too. So yeah, we'll wrap it there. But I appreciate the time. Stay on the line, and I'll say bye offline. But is there anything you wanted to kind of plug? Do you have anywhere that you want people to follow, Twitter or Instagram?
No, I try. I'm on LinkedIn. I try to stay off Twitter. I'm on Instagram, but I purely on Instagram relative to cocktail recipes. So you'd probably be bored reading that. No, if there's anything we can ever assist with, or I could assist with in terms of your police department or others, I'd be more than willing to assist and support you guys, or have other further conversations about some of the topics we discussed today.
Great. Okay, I'll end the recording. Just hang on the line.
Okay, thanks.